turning outrageous, unbelievable. But every single time the United States of America comes against Israel, within 24 hours, there's a natural disaster, a catastrophe of some sort. Now, John, how did you originally get this correlation? This is amazing. You've written a whole book filled showing that within 24 hours, sometime even the same day, these horrible things happen. How did you find this out?
Sid, it all started in 1987, and I noticed a correlation between events of homosexuality and abortion and disasters on the United States. For example, Gay Pride Day, massive earthquakes on Gay Pride Day, Supreme Court decisions about abortion, hurricanes slamming in the country on that day. And I noticed all these natural disasters were occurring on days like that. And then starting in 1991 with the Madrid peace process, I noticed that the same thing was occurring as far as natural disasters go as we began to push Israel over the covenant land.
Okay, I can see things having to do with abortion, which is murder, with homosexuality, but why Israel of the same magnitude?
It's a very good question, Sid, and the reason is God has made an everlasting covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and their descendants over the land. That covenant is very dear to God because with that covenant, He sent the prophets. We have the Word of God through that covenant, and the Messiah, the Lord Jesus, came through that covenant. And the final restoration of man comes through that covenant, the second coming of the Lord. So that covenant is very dear to the heart of God. He has called the Jewish people back into the land, whether they know that or not. They're being brought back in by God, and He's watching that covenant, and the scriptures say that any nation that forces Israel to divide that land, the covenant land, He will judge.
Okay, you mention in your book something called the Madrid Peace Conference. What was that?
Sid, the Madrid peace process started in October of 1991, and it's a code word for Israel to give up the land. That's what it is. It's to give. If you listen to the media, you hear the West Bank, and you don't realize the biblical significance. But the West Bank in the Bible is Judea and Samaria. And then, of course, East Jerusalem, which is the city of David, that's all part of the, quote, negotiations for the peace process. So when the peace process was initiated, that was the idea, for Israel to give up Judea, Samaria, and East Jerusalem for so-called peace. Well, the peace process was initiated by President Bush Sr. And after the first Gulf War in 1991. And the very day the peace process met in Madrid, Spain, on that very day, the perfect storm arose. If you're familiar with the perfect storm?
Well, there was a book and a movie.
Right. And to this day, it's the most powerful storm ever recorded in the North Atlantic. It came 1,000 miles the wrong way. It started...
What do you mean the wrong way?
Well, yeah, I know that's a little hard to understand going the wrong way, or it's a little strange to hear, but the weather patterns, now just think in your mind, the weather patterns in the United States go from west to east.
Right.
We don't have... When's the last time you heard of a storm forming, we'll say, off of Virginia and affecting California?
Right, so that would be the wrong way.
That's the wrong way. Well, this storm generated in the North Atlantic off Nova Scotia came 1,000 miles, let me make sure I get this right, east to west, not west to east, came east to west, and within hours, the time difference, I was able to figure it out, when the president was initiating the Madrid peace process, the perfect storm hit his home in Kennebunkport, Maine, which is on the coast, with 30-foot waves, did hundreds of thousands of dollars in damage to his home. And when he came back from Madrid, he had to go back to his home in Kennebunkport, Maine, to oversee the reconstruction of it.
My goodness, did you get that? When the president is saying land for peace,
right.
His own, I mean, how precise can you get? His own home had hundreds of thousands of dollars of damage?
The same day, Sid.
The same day?
Same day. And the meteorologists that's why it's called a perfect storm, because three strange storm patterns came together at the same time to create the perfect storm. And it hit his home on the very day that he was initiating the Madrid peace process, which was for Israel to give up the covenant land. His own land was being devastated by the storm.
But then you point out something even far worse. When they brought this Madrid peace conference from Spain to the United States, what happened?
Well, the following August, that would be August of 1992, the Madrid peace process was transferred, as you said, from Madrid, Spain to Washington, D.C. The first meeting was August 24th, 1992. On that very day, Sid, well, actually just a couple hours before the meeting, the greatest natural disaster to this day occurred in the United States. That was Hurricane Andrew. Hurricane Andrew was a Class 5 hurricane. With the eye of the hurricane was 28 miles wide. The winds were up to 200 miles an hour. So when that hit southern Florida, it was like a 28-mile wide tornado. Isn't that amazing?
I remember seeing the coverage of that. And you say that was the worst natural, like September 11th was horrible, but that you would not classify
No, that's not natural.
But the worst natural disaster in the history of the United States happened within hours of this Madrid peace conference?
Hurricane Andrew swept through Florida early in the morning of August 24th. At 9 o'clock in the morning, the Madrid peace process met in Washington for the first time. Just a couple hours difference.
Now, you make a point in your book about all of the connections between coming against Israel or the Jew and a natural disaster that happens. Every time does this happen?
Well, Sid, what happens every time is when Yasser Arafat came to the United States. Every time Yasser Arafat came to the United States, or the Secretary of State, former Secretary of State Albright went to Israel to meet with him, and former President Bill Clinton went to Israel to meet with Arafat. All those occasions, tremendous disasters hit the United States on the very day. Just think, when did the president's scandal begin? When he was waiting to meet with Arafat. That's when it broke.
But I also heard he snubbed Netanyahu at that time.
Yes, that's correct. That's correct. Hurricanes hit on those days, tremendous tornado outbreaks. Stock market, the stock market, it's interesting, Sid, I'd be watching the stock market and it would be going along. Arafat would come, and that day it would drop 265 points. It would drop, the next time he would come, it would drop 225 points. He would come and the stock market would bracket, crashing. Like,
okay, but wait a second. Now, you explained the Lewinsky thing,
yes.
But you're saying it had something to do with even the impeachment proceedings against President Clinton?
Right. Now, think back. We just mentioned about the scandal breaking when the president was waiting to meet with Arafat, correct?
Yes.
Now, where was the president when the articles of impeachment were drawn up against him? He was over in Israel meeting with Arafat at the exact time the House of Representatives filed those 3 articles of impeachment against him.
My goodness, I wouldn't want to meet with Arafat, would you?
No, Sid. No, it brings a curse with it. I mean, he cost us billions of dollars every time he came in natural disasters.
But the principle, John, isn't Arafat. The principle is, what does Arafat stand for?
Exactly, Sid. That's exactly right.
What does he stand for?
He stands for the dividing of the covenant land, but even more than that, I believe, and it's out in the open, this is nothing hidden, this was an agenda for the destruction of the nation of Israel, to get a separate state and to get as much land as they could with East Jerusalem as the capital, and use that from a jumping off point to literally destroy the nation of Israel and drive. They've made it crystal clear they want to destroy the nation of Israel and drive the Jewish people back into the sea, or back into the Mediterranean Sea, or back into the nations, out of the Middle East.
Now, John, you say something outrageous in this book. I mean, to me, the 3 greatest financial natural disasters or disasters in history from an insurance viewpoint all are correlated with Israel. Explain that.
Well, Sid, the first one I already did, and that was Hurricane Andrew. Now, that was the greatest natural disaster. The second one was the Northridge earthquake in Southern California. And what happened was President Clinton met with, you remember Assad, the dictator of Syria?
Of course.
They met in Geneva in 1994 over Israel. And they didn't even invite Israel to come. And I'll never forget this. I watched it on TV. It was just a little soundbite, but the president was behind a pulpit, or a podium, I guess it would be. And Assad was to one side of him. And the president of the United States said that, and I'm paraphrasing, but it's very close, that the Israelis may not like this, but they're going to have to give back or give up the Golan Heights for peace. And
wait a second now. You know what the Golan Heights is, don't you? I mean, if Israel gives up the Golan Heights, they give up all their defense.
That's correct.
They would be helpless.
You're absolutely correct, Sid. But he said it in a tone, when I listened to it, that was dogmatic. It was like very forceful. Within hours of that speech of his, and I don't know how many hours, but just a couple hours, the Northridge earthquake, I heard that, let me just back up, I heard that at the late night news. I went to bed, and I remember getting a bad feeling, because I was documenting us being judged for things like this. I woke up in the morning, I turned the news on, and the Northridge earthquake had occurred. That's the second greatest natural disaster that the United States was within hours of the President of the United States saying Israel had to give up the Golan Heights for peace. And just I want to touch upon the Northridge earthquake. The cause of the Northridge earthquake was never found.
With all the science we have today and technology.
Right. It's a mysterious fault that caused it. The second thing is, the reason it did so much damage was not the power of it, but there was a thrust up of the land and then a sliding back and forth. Now, there's two types of earthquakes. There's a thrust and the sliding. This one was two occurring at the same time, which these scientists are amazed at, because they're saying, in effect, there were two different earthquakes occurring at the same time.
So
you follow what I'm saying?
Yeah, but let me tell you what I believe that he's saying. He's saying that not only was there judgment, but even the perfect storm, he explained, was the opposite of the way physics say it should occur, and the same thing with the Northridge earthquake. I mean, I think God is making his position real clear.
Well, God has his economy, Sid, and I didn't know this at the time because I don't know much about California, but Northridge, California happens to be the pornography capital of the United States, or maybe the world. 90% of all the video pornography in the United States is made in Northridge. So here we have the pornography center touched within hours after the president telling Israel, you are going to have to give up the Golan Heights for peace.
Tell me the truth. When you see the United States do something anti-Israel, anti-Jewish, do you just get down and pray and open the newspaper the next day and see something? I mean, does it work that, if you will, scientifically with you?
Well, Sid, it's usually very easy. I mean, to see these events, it's usually I'll be driving in the car and I'll hear that something is going on with the United States and Israel. And then, for example, a tremendous tornado outbreak.
All right, give me some specifics where something happens to Israel and either in the newspaper in the same day, or the two things are together, or the next day.
It's usually front page in the newspapers.
Give me an example.
It's the president's scandal, the Madrid peace process, Hurricane Andrew, and the list goes on and on and on, right to this very day. You know, when we're pushing Israel over the covenant land, usually that's on the front page with the disaster.
Absolutely amazing. I mean, within 24 hours, every time the United States does something against Israel, there is horrible catastrophes. But what kind of feedback are you getting from this book? Who have you given this book to? I mean, I think everyone that's in politics should get a hold of this. Every Christian should get a hold of it. Every person should get a hold of this.
Well, the President of the United States was not given one copy. He was given two copies. Two people close to him have read the book and gave him copies of it. That's President Bush. Benjamin Netanyahu was given a copy. Ariel Sharon was given a copy. Many congressmen and senators were given copies of my book.
What feedback do you get from an average person that reads this book?
It's having an impact on people, Sid. You don't read the book and just walk away from it without having an impact on you. I'm getting very, very, very good feedback.
And you know what I like about the book? In addition to that, it has the whole history of Israel and the events leading up to what's going on even today. And I believe it behooves everyone to understand Israel.
Well, you mentioned something, Sid, that the book is more than just the disasters. I think there's 35 disasters in it. And we're not talking about weekend thunderstorms. We're talking about massive tornadoes, stock market crashes, things like that. But the book is comprehensive. It gives you about the covenant, which we discussed. It talks about what the prophets say about the dispersion, restoration of Israel, the history of Israel, God judging the United States. It goes into politics, current politics regarding Israel, and then a little bit of prophecy. So the reader gets a comprehensive view of Israel through the book.
Tell you what, I'm going to let my announcer tell you how to get this book, and then I want to show you the tie-in with September 11th. Don't go away. Hello, Sid Roth, your investigative reporter, here with John McTurnan. Now, John, September 11th. I have not heard anyone, anywhere, show the Israel connection. Explain.
Well, Sid, one example by itself, probably you could say it's a coincidence. But as you've mentioned, there are dozens and dozens. It's about 35. And that's the background that I give to 9/11. I just don't want to isolate 9/11. But what happened was, and the information I'm giving you comes directly from the New York Times and the Washington Post. This is my source for what I'm about to tell you. Just prior to 9/11, about a week prior to 9/11, President Bush had formulated his policy towards Israel. And his policy was that we were going to unilaterally recognize a Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as the capital, and we were going to put our ambassador in East Jerusalem, an ambassador to a Palestinian state in East Jerusalem, and this was going to occur on September 23rd at the UN General Assembly. This was 2001. And on September 13th, the Secretary of State was going to inform the Saudi Arabian ambassador that this was the intentions of the United States. On September 11th, which was right in the middle of this, 9/11 happened. And the very terrorists that the United States was going to force Israel into a coexistence of a state with, because I don't know about you, Sid, but I don't see much difference between Osama bin Laden and Yasser Arafat. As far as I'm concerned, Yasser Arafat is like the father of at least modern terrorism. I mean, plane hijacking and all that, he invented it.
But I want to make a point. It isn't Yasser Arafat, and it isn't even any of his lieutenants that take his place. There is an enemy in the invisible world that hates God, hates God's covenant people, and that's what's going on. I don't see how God can make it any clearer.
Sid, it's not being hid. It's on what he's doing with the warnings to America are on front page.
Okay, I have to ask you a question. Let's suppose that what Powell was about ready to do actually someday occurs. There will be a Palestinian state right next to an Israel state, the Jewish state. The Jewish people will have the land God has promised. The Palestinians will have the land God has promised to the Jewish people.